Shesh heino sonei adoinoi, vesheva toyavas nafshoi. 6 seien die, was Gott hat Feind, und 7 die Werdigkeit von sein Sel. Mishlei Yud Tes Zayin.
Welcome back to another episode of Radiant Others. My name is Dan Blacksburg, and I'm a klezmer trombonist, educator, and composer, etc., podcaster, of course, recording from my basement in West Philadelphia. The Radiant Others podcast is once again coming at you with a new episode where I talk with one of my peers, one of my colleagues, one of my mentors, one of my people who I'm just getting to know, but I'm excited by, from the Yiddish and klezmer music scene and all the roads that lead to and from there. Today's episode features a conversation between me and actor, playwright, lyricist, Yiddishist, and a whole lot more, Mikhl Yashinsky. Mikhl shares his fantastic passion for all things Yiddish, the language, the poetry, the music, the history, and more. We talk about the many connections to Yiddish that Mikhl has in his personal history, his journey to the heights of the modern Yiddish theater, and even how he creates new Yiddish theater, specifically by finding some really, really great stories within the tradition, within the history, that then spark some pretty imaginative and awesome new plays. This conversation is a good overview of one of the top people acting and creating new Yiddish theater today. And it's honestly just a really fun conversation for me to just talk about and love Yiddish. If you're in New York for the last week of June, Mikhl will be premiering a new Yiddish musical, Suda von die Sieben Syndikos, Feast of the Seven Sinners, the last weekend of June, like I said, at the 14th Street Y in Manhattan. It'll have music written by Mikhl, Matthias Kaufman, Rebecca McInnes, and Rafi Bowden. You can buy tickets at the link in our show notes. And as always, now that we're talking about money, we are always asking for your help in supporting what we do at the Radiant Others podcast, sharing these awesome conversations with you, getting you bird's eye, fly on the wall experience of people who are really just pouring their hearts and souls into this culture and this music and this art and this language and everything around it. You can support us in many different ways. You can rate and review it on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to it, Spotify, etc. You can share it with your friends, post about it online on your social media feeds or whatever. And, of course, you can just give us money. One of the best ways to do that is Radiant Others Patreon. That's patreon.com/Radiant Others. And you can just directly donate to us there or reach out and talk to us if you have any other ideas about how you can support us or how we could work together. We're all ears. So that's all I've got for now, and let's listen in on this really fun conversation between me and Mikhl Yashinsky.
Farvos steuert es 6 fliehen, bis der Malchamovis der Greicht sein Ziel. Weil seinen do 5 Sibes far der Misse, eine von sie, der Chet von Odem Harischen, und die 7 andere, die 7 Häuptaveres, wo sie seinen Geuren die alle andere Averes, und sie sennen Taive, Kine, Gaive, Kilis, Batole, Znus, Sines Abries.
All right, welcome to another episode of Radiant Others, and I'm really excited to be talking to Mikhl Yashinsky, who is doing everything from appearing on Broadway to creating their own plays to taking over the Yiddish internet and crushing YouTube in their own way.
Ashenim Dank, Dan. It's great to be with you here.
Yeah, you know, one of the great things about this podcast is I get to just talk to whoever I want. And, you know, the Yiddish world is so small that everybody says yes so far. And and so, you know, I've done a lot of talks with people where the episode itself is just kind of a continuation of a conversation we've been having for years. But, like, this is probably one of the first chances that you and I have gotten a chance to sit down and really get into things with, even though especially recently, I feel like our work has sort of been passing by each other a little more. Specifically, I guess this was not incredibly recent, but you did a couple of translations into Yiddish of songs, both for Michael Winograd, which we performed, which was really something very cool and silly, and then also something really, really heartfelt for my friend Jack Brownstein. I think I put you in touch for that, for a piece that he wanted translated into Yiddish.
It's true, yeah. I think we've sort of been, I've seen you, of course, and heard you play at festivals. And we've had some kind of remote sort of collaboration of some kind. Yeah, the song for Michael was ABBA.
Yep.
Is that the one you did?
Yeah, we played the ABBA song.
Right. And that was, I guess he was just enamored of that ABBA song, The Way Old Friends Do.
It worked sometime. Once we got the hang of it, it really was pretty hysterical. And then my friend Jack wrote this really, really a really heartfelt, serious album of his own music that he wanted to, and that's somebody who I've worked with. He's since left Philadelphia, but we did a lot of klezmer together in the Colt Tzedek Simcha band, which is something that that's a whole part of my life. And, it's like you said, I've seen you on festivals. We had the pleasure of seeing you in the Yiddish Fiddler and being like, hey, there's the other guy who actually knows Yiddish.
Yes.
No offense. It's a great show. It was a great show.
No, of course. It was a unique position to be in. There were about, three of us in the starting cast of the Fiddler, Joanne Bortz and Daniel Kahn and I, who could actually speak Yiddish and sort of are immersed in the world of Yiddish culture and language, and I ended up having the happy task of helping a lot of my castmates backstage on a sort of informal volunteer basis, but they would often come to me for help with pronunciation and what can I ad-lib or in this or that moment where I want to express this or that, and I would give them, Yiddish ad-libs to sort of add to this sort of sound atmosphere on stage, so they weren't just coming out with English or, God forbid, nonsense Yiddish. Yeah.
Yeah, no, good, thanks. It's like what's word. I would almost rather than break the language barrier rather than just make up sounds.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about, it's Avia Moore called this recently her Yiddish origin story or something like that. And I have a funny thing, which I've mentioned on this before, so I'll just say, people have made up an origin story for me, often people who are older, because they saw me as friends with people like Sarah Gordon and Michael Winograd when we were all really young, in our early 20s, who had been coming to Klez Camp or being involved in the world since they were mid-teenagers. And they just lumped me in there, even though I actually didn't show up until I was in college. So I have this funny Yiddish origin story where, I've got my own real version, but then there's the one that people sort of made up. And either way, people from outside of the world hear what we do, and they're like, well, oh my God, this is so deep. It must come from beyond the womb or something like that. And maybe that's true. That's certainly true of some of the people in the scene, right? It's sort of you take an Itzik Gottesman or something like that. That's generations of Yiddish scholarship and almost ideological presentation of stuff, and that's amazing and it's beautiful. But where do you fall? Do you get that kind of thing ever where they're like, oh my God, this must be in your molecules?
Well, of course, yes. And it's always, one of the first questions, why Yiddish? But it's an important question.
That's true.
And it's never, I guess, a very clear answer. But for me, I guess a bit of both. All my grandparents were Yiddish speaking, and one of my grandmothers, there's two grandmothers who are important to this story. One of them, who is bis 120, may she live to 120, still with us. And she's from Brisk, although lives in Detroit now, and I grew up in Detroit. She's a very frum woman, but speaks Yiddish natively and spoke Yiddish with her parents, but is not as interested in sort of what we would see as, secular Yiddish language culture. I actually went to my first summer program in Yiddish at the Yiddish Book Center, the Steiner Summer Yiddish program, when I was around 25. And I came back from it and was at Shabbos with my Baba. And she asked, what did you study at this program? And I said, I studied Yiddish language and culture. And she said, what do you mean culture? We didn't have culture. We were poor. Which, of course they had culture. They had songs and proverbs and cooking and all of that. But she saw culture as something sort of highbrow that was something they didn't take part in. But I would hear her speaking in Yiddish with my other grandmother, who was verbrannte Yiddishistke. She was very passionate about Yiddishkeit, Yiddish culture, Yiddish language. And she actually visited the Yiddish Book Center years before I did to go for just a week-long language program. And she got the Pakenträger. And I remember seeing the Pakenträger, the magazine of the Yiddish Book Center, in her home as a kid, and thinking only my grandma Liz would have a magazine called Pakenträger, which I had no concept really of what it meant or what it represented. But I would look at it with curiosity and eventually learned a lot from her and borrowed Yiddish books from her library and Yiddish films. And it was from those two grandmothers, I think, that the original spark came. And then as an adult, I sort of began committing myself to serious study of the language. And for the past 10 years or so, it's been, my vocation has become largely Yiddish.
Yeah. I mean, and it's very clear, like you've made, I want to talk about all the ways that you've done that, because you've done it very, in front. You're not just sort of sitting behind the scenes waiting for things to come. You've offered a lot of things and figured out a lot of ways to put, your love of Yiddish out in the world, and also, hopefully make a living at it. I mean, who knows what that means in our world? No one really makes a full living at one thing. But yeah, what's so interesting about this path that you do is that I always say that in order to get really, really hooked into this world, you're not going to get hooked by one hook. You're going to get hooked by like 7 at least, So you talk to anybody who's sort of made a life in this, and you always can uncover. Sometimes it's really easy to uncover. It's like, oh, I grew up at Camp Kinderland, or, I did this, or something usually a little subtler, like, oh, the chazan at my shul, or the chazan at my one parent's shul that I only went to on high holidays was a real old school chazan, or something like, and then there's all these little hooks that grab you. And for you, it seems like it was there were plenty around to get hooked in by. And, but one of the questions I had from what you just said is, it sounds like it was the Yiddish language itself that was really grabbing you as sort of its first thing, or was there also music? Because for me, it was the instrumental music, because I was coming from like an instrumentalist, and I was a jazzy guy, and like all these kind of like, threads kind of tied their way around me over time. But yeah, was it the language as well, or was there music as well?
Yeah, all of that.
I mean, there's kind of always, because it's like, what's Yiddish language without music almost?
No, of course. And Yiddish language is a kind of music itself, but it was really all of it. I remember my grandma Liz singing Yiddish songs, and my mom would always she would start in my grandma on my Yiddish mame, or Russian songs also, Ochi Chorny, and we would like to listen. My mom would point out for how my grandma would put a sob into the start of every phrase. And I grew up thinking that was sort of just a funny, unique, interesting, deep thing that my grandmother did, but later learned as I became more immersed in it that this is really a sort of krechts, the sort of groan or lament that you hear in cantorial singing and in fiddle playing and all of that. But she would sing, mein Yiddish Mame, etc. So I grew up hearing those songs, and I grew up... I started buying records, and I would find Yiddish records in high school, college, and falling in love with those songs and starting to study them. And I remember, Natanya Devrat, I really liked her singing, and other singers like her, Rasha, which that's a name I'm always confused by, but the singer who just goes by Raasche. Yeah, and also the Yiddish language, hearing bits of language, watching Yiddish films at my grandmother's. I remember she had a filmed performance from the Volksbühne that I watched, and it was called, I think, Ashirich fin Himmel, and I think it was the Volksbühne, but it was some filmed Yiddish performance that she had on VHS that I took out, because she really had a sort of lending library, and being amazed that this was something, from the 1990s, that people were still creating stage productions in this language. It was all of it. And yeah, sometimes I think oh, it was really this that made me really want to study it, or it was that, but it was a lot of things. In college, I was in my first Yiddish play. Deborah Kaplan, who's now a professor of theater at Baruch College, and she was, when I was in Harvard, an undergrad, she was a grad student studying Yiddish, and she put on a night of Yiddish scenes called Die ganze Welt ist ein Theater, The Whole World is a Theater. And I played in 2 scenes from Dybbuk and from Grüne Felder, Green Fields. And that was really powerful, my first time acting in Yiddish. But then in high school, we also sang Rozinkes mit Mandlin once for a Holocaust memorial ceremony. I remember that was important. Our Mora Mali, our Hebrew teacher, had us doing that. Yeah, and in college, I wanted to study Yiddish, but I sort of always danced around it. There was Yiddish offered at the time at Harvard, but I took Russian instead, and then I committed myself to German. For some reason, I thought, Yiddish, it's in my family. I can go and get it anytime. And right now, I need to focus on languages that are useful.
Yeah. I hear those air quotes.
Yeah. Yeah, the air quotes are there because Yiddish has proven the most useful and the most nourishing, really.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think it's so wonderful to find the sort of places where, for each of the people that I get to talk to, and then it sort of helps me realize this about myself, where, passive decisions or decisions of passion that, when you're young, you find your way to stuff that, you're very free in how you choose things, and you're just going for it. And, we should always keep doing that. And as you get older, there's these moments where you sort of find yourself either deciding to go in a specific direction or realize that you've decided to go in a specific direction. And then, I think about, for me, one of the big changes was after a long time of, playing gigs in New York and Philadelphia here and there and going to all the festivals I could, whether I was teaching or participating, there was a time, and playing a lot of gigs. So my career had started already, but it was like maybe about 12 years ago or something like that, I really decided to start actively teaching klezmer in Philly year round. Because one of the things was, unless you're in a place like New York or maybe Montreal or some other places, your experience of being able to engage with sort of an immersive version of this culture is kind of limited to if you can get to a festival like Klez Camp or Klez Canada, and that's only 5-6 days a max. I guess you could go to Yiddish Summer Weimar for 6 weeks, but even then, the immersion is a little bit divided up because the way they organize things there are sort of by, it's like 1 week is singing, 1 week is dance, etc. And so I just felt like every time I would go to one of these things, it was just like supercharging my interest and experience. But that it was still kind of passive. It was like I'd go and then just do everything I could think to do. And then when I, started choosing to teach this, and it was just people getting together in a friend's house with some snacks on a Sunday afternoon. And that was like such a big moment for me of taking ownership of this tradition, or like my role in it, or the possibilities of what my role could be, And so I'm just wondering, what were some of these moments where you had sort of either you made a decision, or there was sort of a realization that you were sort of on a path already,
a
couple steps down the path?
After college, I had moved back to Detroit and was working at the Detroit Opera House because I'm also really passionate about operas. And at one time, I thought opera would be my main path. And I was working there, assistant directing operas and, directing children's operas. I remember during that time when I lived in Detroit, I went to my family's shul's rummage sale, and there was a copy of Yehoyash's translation of not the New Testament. that came later, my interest in Yiddish translations of the New Testament. But that was Yehoyash's Yiddish translation of the Tanakh, of the Hebrew Bible. And I bought that at this rummage sale and took it home and opened it up and found that it was bilingual, the original Hebrew and the Yiddish, and I found that I could read it and begin to understand it and to study from it without any intervention from English, because I had studied Hebrew Bible in my 12 years at Jewish day school. So I was able to read the Hebrew, and then reading that in parallel with the Yiddish, it was like the letters sort of started shining on the page, black fire on white fire, and really became extremely exciting and illuminating to me. And I think that was a big moment. And I just went farther and farther. I ended up in those years directing a production of Brundibar, which is a Holocaust-era Czech children's opera that was performed in the concentration camp Theresienstadt. Ooh. And we did that at the Opera House with our children's chorus, and I directed it. And we did it in English translation from the original Czech, but I wanted to have a sort of curtain raiser, a play that would come before it that would tell the story of the origins of this fascinating piece and its connection with the Holocaust. And I thought, well, I should probably have some Yiddish in there. So I found a Yiddish poem of a mother looking for her son in the ghetto, and I gave it to my grandmother to perform on the night. She was an actress. She was a professional actress. So sitting at the kitchen table with her in her home and just rehearsing this poem over and over for days, preparing her for this performance, that was really special and a moment of sort of intergenerational sharing.
Yeah, that's
that
amazing.
Felt very tangible. And that was her last stage performance at age 89. And,
rock and roll. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember in rehearsals, I didn't want anyone to know this was my grandmother because I wanted her to be there for her own merits and talent. So I didn't address her as grandma and all of that. I just addressed her as Liz. But once at rehearsal, she slipped and called me honey or sweetheart. And then immediately after, she made a very sort of obvious apology and said, "Oh, don't worry, kids. I call all my directors sweetheart." But that was really special. And hearing her perform in Yiddish on the stage and me directing that. Yeah.
That's so cool. And so, you went from opera. I mean, opera is a brave and bold thing to be involved in. It's like one of the biggest, I think of it as like the most giantest part of art making, of like the performing arts, almost more than movies, even though those obviously are like, the giantest in their own way. But, opera, it's like, it's even great. Like, anyway, we could go on a whole thing about opera, which maybe we should, but I also definitely want to come back to this, Yiddish translation of the New Testament, which you you made a piece out of, I remember recently. And, so just to like follow the line of where we're at in your life a little bit. So then when did you move to New York?
I moved to New York for Yiddish theater in 2018, 19. It was like a bit of stops and starts, but I was cast I'd earlier performed in The Sorceress with the Volksbühne, and that was my first professional Yiddish theater gig. But that I had just taken a month or two off work of the Yiddish Book Center for. I was living in Amherst, Mass. At the time and went and did that. But then once I was cast in The Fiddler, I moved to New York to do that because it was going to be a whole summer thing.
Fair.
But the reason there was stops and starts is because around the same time I was cast in that and received a position as lecturer in Yiddish at the University of Michigan.
Oh, wow.
So I was meant to start that in September and perform for 7 weeks in Fiddler the summer before. So it was going to work. Except that Fiddler was too popular and
just a little bit
ended up extending. At the end of the summer, I had to go and start my position in Ann Arbor at the University of Michigan. I had already signed my contract and gotten that job before I auditioned for Fiddler. So I went and did that. But then towards the end of my first semester there, and I did have a great time teaching Yiddish, and I loved my students there, I got a call again from the Volksbühne saying they were now not only extending into the new year, but were going to move into a theater right in the heart of Theater District in New York City, and it was going to be a big deal, and they wanted me back, and Joel Grey, they said, wanted me back. And
I mean, this is a reasonable thing to drop everything for.
Yeah, I know maybe you can't say no to Joel Grey, but
I wouldn't.
It was a real crisis actually for me at the time.
That's fair.
Yeah, because I felt and I could actually, there was a wonderful job at the University of Michigan, and it's a job that if I had done well, I could have actually been there my whole life for decades.
Right.
And it was close to my family and all of that. But something was pulling me to Yiddish theater, and it really is my sort of biggest passion. If I could name what's my favorite thing to do of all these things I do with Yiddish, it is to perform in Yiddish on the stage. And I felt it was fulfilling the same mission as I would have been doing at the University of Michigan. It's about sort of spreading the joy and magic of Yiddish, and I would have been spreading it with Fiddler to an even greater number of people. And ultimately, I made the choice to go and do that, for which I had to leave the position at University of Michigan. I don't regret it because one thing has led to the next and led to plenty of other interesting opportunities here in New York. Yeah.
It's a different kind of life.
Yeah.
You're talking about two completely different types of life.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I'll say, I don't know if I mentioned this already, but my whole family we got to see. I just through life, I really didn't get to see the Yiddish Fiddler until you had come back for those performances at that place that was like a movie theater-ish place.
Right, New World Stages.
Yeah, but I did finally see it, and like I said, it was great to see you in it, and it was so impressive because I think, well, we'll see. I'm gonna have to confirm this whether we can leave it in because it might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that my wife had never seen the play or the movie, so she actually didn't know the story going in, and it's like, what an imagination, what an experience, and it was really cool. Like I think it's a fair choice. That was a phenomenon, right?
Yeah.
I don't think you're certainly not gonna get any Yiddish theater experience like that anytime. Like I'm not even sure it ever happened before.
No, it's true. I mean, I felt it was like a real blessing to just, every day get on the subway and head to my job in the Yiddish theater, and to get to do that for a whole year, more than a year, as a full-time job, 8 shows a week. It was it was living out a dream, and also like living in a different era, which I also love to sort of live that fantasy, but it's like, being a full-time Yiddish theater actor, that opportunity only presents itself now and then. Yeah.
I was thinking a lot about I was watching your Yiddish Alive videos on YouTube, and I was thinking about you and the fact that you've done translating, and obviously you've been a teacher, and you have a lot of different things you've done. But there's also a lot of things that you do, right? And it makes sense because you chose this freelance, wacky life of a performer, and I was just thinking about what I wrote down was the technical skill set of a modern Yiddish performer, right? And I was thinking about language, performance, video, all these things, and I was trying to find this article. There's this article I read a long time ago that was about all the different jobs that a performing artist does. So it's like when you're like, well, what do you do? And it's like, well, I'm my own executive assistant. I'm my own bookkeeper. I'm my own costume designer. I'm my own music director. And it was like written by this person who I think was like a professional hula hooper. And it was a great article, and I couldn't find it, but it was just, I was thinking, oh yeah, this really reminds me of what I see of you doing. It's like you're out there just being like, hey, I'm doing all of this stuff, right? So yeah, like what were the technical skill set of you as a modern Yiddish performer?
I guess, to me, I don't know. To me, I guess it all starts with the language. I have a real sort of, I've always had a yen for languages, and it starts with the words of Yiddish themselves, and those I think are my guide and my greatest tool and my inspiration. And then from there you start developing other skills related to that.
That's right.
Present and perform those words and interpret them on stage, and how to set them to music, and how to create new words that fit interesting sort of Yiddish inflected rhythms and musical forms, and how to translate those words into English, and how to teach those words to other people. But I think we're a people of the book, and it all starts, I think, with books and with the language and with that power, and that sort of then spills over into all these other skills, and we figure out ways how to work with those words. And a lot, I guess the pandemic forced a lot of us to be just very sort of resourceful and to gain a lot of new skills. And just creating things from the home, which is when that sort of Yiddish Alive series started. We just had to figure out how to use the tools that were at our fingertips and to develop them. So I would just, when I started making those videos, I would recruit my mother to, like, for instance, in this video I made about strawberries and wrote a song about strawberries, Truskawke Waltz, the Strawberry Waltz. And my mother baked a cake that I filmed with the strawberries that we picked, and my brother Gabe filmed, and I wrote a song and edited it and all of that. So, I think it made us have to get creative, and also people were looking for something interesting to do and to involve themselves in and to spend their own time with, and that's how I ended up getting so many sort of online Yiddish students. And but it's nice now to be back after all of that in person, making art with people in a room.
Yeah, I mean, I'm proud of all the video editing skills I gained in the thing, and the setup I'm recording on right here certainly wouldn't existed without the pandemic sort of forcing it to happen. But it's really nice to be. There's nothing beats being in person. One of the things I was thinking about was we've talked about all the stuff that you got in your childhood, and my experience in childhood was I kind of didn't listen to the popular music of my day. I just listened to some jazz, into a very small area of musical theater for a long time, started listening to jazz, got into really weird music, just listened to that all the time. The radio, was really into the jazz radio station. And somehow, I mean, if it was at school dances, I probably could recognize it, but it's like, I talk to my friends who are from, the 90s like me, and it's just like, they're like, this, and this. I'm like, what? And then when Napster came along, it changed a little bit. But, I mean, were you also into, like, normal people music?
I've always been interested. I've always been into both.
Yeah.
But definitely felt gravitation towards my favorite singer growing up was a singer called Big May Bell, who was a jump blues kind of shouter. And that's another thing I got from my grandmother, though, because I saw her record first at my grandmother's house among her records. And I just saw Big May Bell's beautiful face on the cover of one of the records. And I was just fascinated by who this person was and needed to listen to their music. And I put it on, and my grandma said, put on One Monkey Don't Stop No Show. And that's, we listened to that, and I fell in love with that. And Big May Bell's always one that whenever I move to a new place, and I am always moving around, I always play her music as soon as I sort of get settled with my things in the place, and it sort of makes me feel like I'm at home in that place. But yeah, I've always loved that kind of music and old R&B and blues, and also the stuff that was coming out. But yeah, I found especially the old lyrics, some of them really moved me, and I found really to have a sort of enchantment about them. Yeah, like, the song Midnight Sun?
Remind me.
Is a jazz song, I think originally without words, and then Johnny Mercer wrote words to it, and the words are just like a poem. Your lips were like a red and ruby chalice, warmer than the summer night. The clouds were like an alabaster palace, rising to a snowy height. Each star its own aurora borealis. Suddenly you held me tight. I could see the midnight sun. And that I found on an album of Ella Fitzgerald Sings the Great American Songbook that my parents got me when I was 14 or 15. And I remember listening to that over and over on the CD player that I had gotten for my bar mitzvah, and just being sort of transported by that.
Exactly.
Liebe ist nicht enough.
I mean, it's just, and the reason why I even asked that was just because I was really enjoying your use of auto-tune in some of those videos. And, it's something that, like, I was thinking, it's really good to, you just got to figure out how to be yourself and put everything into it, right? It's like as many ideas as you can come up with, especially for Yiddish music, because it's like, there's a lot of nostalgia traps that are out there. I'm not saying like people who are involved in our world are focused on them. I think in general we're focused away from them. But, I remember one time being in a cab to a funeral, and I get in this cab, and there's this Russian person driving the cab, and somehow it comes out that I play Yiddish music. And he's like, oh, do you know? And I forget the name of this guy, and starts playing this Russian Yiddish singer who has the most over-the-top, largest spectacle level of instruments
Right.
that I've ever heard. And it was like a nostalgia nuclear bomb, and I just remember going like, I can't believe this exists, and so, yeah, I mean, I guess that's his own version of that. Just put everything you got in there. But yeah, we get to just, have fun, especially during the pandemic. How else are we going to stay sane?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think I have a great love for music from many decades ago and even centuries ago. But I think when I create now, my tendency is towards the new. I'm sort of fired and inspired by the past. But when I create something, I want it to draw also from the present and to reflect who we are and our own ways of thinking and being in the world. And that's the sort of like when I go to create music or a play, that's what I'm trying to do, sort of using these tools of the past, but create something that speaks to us now and reflects us now.
Yeah, totally. So, yeah, let's get into all the, original work that you've done. Even the idea of, like you were telling me about adding that poem with your grandmother before the thing. So it sounds like even before maybe you were creating your own works, you were sort of still curating the experiences from your own ideas,
Yeah, I guess this kind of largely started when I took a couple playwriting classes in college and saw that, there was one very interesting exercise I remember that she had us, our playwriting professor, Christine Evans, had us go out and loiter and listen to people speaking and then to record exactly their conversations and to just shape a scene, but out of a transcribed conversation that we overheard, that we eavesdropped on. And I thought that was a really powerful exercise, and just listening to people and seeing how interesting people can be even when they don't think anyone's watching them. I remember I went to do you spend time around Harvard Square?
I did in college, so I'm sort of familiar with it.
Where'd you go to school?
I went to New England Conservatory.
Oh, right.
So, typical klezmer.
Yes. But the Garage, which is a hangout there, a sort of indoor mall, but called the Garage. And I remember just standing by people talking about shoes and reality shows. But I don't know. That's when I started writing plays. And I wrote a few plays in English. And yeah, people did things with them and they were interesting. And then I started thinking about, how I could start writing plays in this language I had taken on that was proving so sort of fruitful for my creativity, and started to try to do that. I remember coming across, as a youth, Oscar Wilde's play Salome, which he wrote in French. And I read it and was sort of amazed that this very powerful, incandescent play he could have written in a language that was not his native language. And that's always been sort of an inspiration to me, that you can take something that's not your native language and still create something beautiful that feels alive with it. And, maybe to a native speaker at moments it will sound funny in this way or that way. But if it feels human and immediate and it does something interesting with this language, that's, so I've strived to do that in a few different plays I've written and I'm writing, yeah.
That's great. As you sort of develop your voice in writing Yiddish plays, what were some of the things that you remember were, like fun, easy, brutal, surprising? Was it sort of an extension of just the work you were doing, or did you feel like you had to make some left turns in your own? Was there any point at which you're like, I need to find something that I don't have yet, and then you found it, or haven't found, or still looking for it? It's a lot of avenues, but
Yes. To me, the experience is often I just find something that I find very profoundly strange or unsettling or bizarre or noteworthy, and just I find a reference to it, a footnote or something, and then I think, oh, I can explore this and make a story of this or make a drama of this. So I guess it always starts with that. And like, for instance, when I was at the Yiddish Book Center, I found a reference to, in Max Weinreich's Geschichte von der Jiddischer Sprach, History of the Yiddish Language, he has a chapter on the way of the Shas, that is the way of the Talmud, that is expressions that have entered the Yiddish language from the Talmud or from religious practice. And he has a couple of sentences there about a phrase, machen a mishenichnes, to make a mishenichnes. Which mishenichnes is from the song Mishenichnes Adar Marbin Besimcha. When you enter the month of Adar, your gladness increases. So to machen a mishenichnes, to make a mishenichnes, he said this refers to a custom of yeshiva boys on the first of the month of Adar. They would gang together, grab one of their fellow students, and all hold him and spank him while singing Mi Shenichnas Adar Marbin Besimcha.
Okay.
And I just put that up, I remember, after finding that in the vault at the Yiddish Book Center and putting it up on Facebook and asking, has anyone heard of this strange custom? And no one had, but people were laughing about it and surprised at it. And years later, I wrote a sort of little 3-person, 1-act kind of homoerotic drama that revolved around that custom. So
yeah, as like many, it really screams like it screams like boys boarding school kind of energy too.
Exactly.
Right?
Which, these yeshivas had in leaps and bounds. I think they were surrounded by only other people of their own gender, and it was in the years when, of course, they were sort of developing sexual feelings and all of that. And so in writing the play, which I did in Yiddish, it was it was difficult, certainly, trying to figure out how a yeshiva boy from 1900 speaks, and then trying to imagine also how this custom, which might have been brutal, could be thought of maybe as an opening to a romance of some kind. So some of it's imagination and some of it's working hard on the language and sort of practicing and writing and seeing what comes out and refining. Yeah, but it's fun for me.
But that's so cool, because it's like, I think it's really amazing that you have such a clear picture of the kind of where you find your seeds for things to start growing them. And I mean, what a clear example, like this sort of shocking thing hidden in the, in this book. That's, I think it's a history book. It's not even a book of salacious stories or something like that,
Yes.
And I think it's one of the things, I mean, this reminds me of this theme about Yiddish language and Yiddish song that has been coming up in a lot of these conversations since I kind of came back from a hiatus. But this idea that somewhere that somehow about in this Yiddish culture or this Yiddish like world, things reach really, really far from where they start. So it's like, everything that you just said to me feels as though it has kind of like almost like a one step to the next through line. Oh, you have this practice. Oh, that reminds me of this. Oh, that could lead to that, and blah, 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 blah. And then at the same time, this is like coming from a very religious source so it's this sort of like, there's this way in which I find you, and it's like you have to sort of stretch your mind in multiple directions and pretty far, because you're like, oh, the Talmud, oh, homoerotic play about yeshiva boys. Like, why should those be so close together? And yet, boom, there they are.
Yes, exactly. I think that's sort of one of the wonderful things about what we all do in the culture we're working with, is that the sacred and the profane are always sort of really right there next to each other, mingling in the most frum contexts.
Totally.
You have this sort of, sometimes this wildness or this, something totally unexpected, but it's there in the tradition. And there's a lot of that, I think, in the music and in the theater and in the practice. Yeah,
it's really an interesting thing to sort of notice on, I don't know if it's a meta level or whatever, but I just feel like I keep seeing it in different ways, and it's, whereas like one of the things that I love to point out is in Yiddish poetry, and I should read more Yiddish poetry, but there's this feeling to me as though often you'll have a poem that's like 70% or 80% kind of in one energy wavelength or one feeling or one, let's even say it's describing one season, if it's that kind of a poem. And then the last stanza will just like take a sharp left turn. I had this experience when working on Gebirtig music with Benji Fox Rosen for his album. I noticed it on the stuff that Zwei Brüder were doing on their records. It came up just recently talking with Marilyn Lerner about the Anna Margolin pieces that she released with the recent record that they released with Adrian Cooper. Obviously the music wasn't recent, but in all these settings, and I was just like, what is this thing? Is this just this thing where, and I think it's kind of related. It's like sacred things that should be far away in sort of some other way of looking at the world are actually really close together in sort of our way of looking at the world.
Yeah. I come across it a lot, like you were saying, in poetry and in folk song, where they're just the most sort of elemental kind of primitive feelings being worked out in these songs, and their feelings of unrequited love and sexual frustration, and all being sung, ostensibly for centuries by very devout people. And also these sorts of surprises that you get in these songs, which I've been studying with Ethel Rehm this past year as her.
Ethel.
Yeah, she's amazing. She's the
best.
Rebbe. Yeah. I've been studying, I'm going to her every week in the Bronx and learning Yiddish songs. There was one, the Bela Schechter Gottesman sings that she knows from her mother, Livshe, and we listen a lot to Livshe's recordings, but As in Dreußen geht der Regen, when there's a rain going outside, when it's raining outside. And there's As in Dreußen geht der Regen, während die Stände lach nass, und as a Mädel spielt a Liebe, während ihre Bäckelach blass. Which that's pretty straightforward. When there's a rain outside, the stones get wet, and when a girl has a love affair, her cheeks go pale. But then it goes on to say, und als sie spielt schon die Liebe, verliert sie doch ihre Farben, und als sie spielt nicht aus die Liebe, muss sie doch Jüngerheit sterben. When she has a love affair, she loses all of her color, but when she doesn't carry that love affair to completion, or when she's upset in her love, she must die young. And it's just
that's what I'm saying. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. It's like, wait, what?
Exactly. It's just this surprise, and suddenly it gets very, very dark. Yes. And that's just typical. Yeah.
I'll take it. It's kind of cool. People always, I had this is like a very different part, but I just had this funny experience where this guy met me for coffee and something, and he just said, you're a lot more upbeat than I thought you'd be from your music. And I was like, well, yeah, but that's art. Like, it's supposed to be there, but also this is our shit, like I actually, I felt this kind of, whatever, I'm a disaffected millennial, but like, this really resonated with me right away. It's very, and who knows, and this stuff, you don't necessarily need a Churban or a Holocaust to get that dark. We had plenty of reasons before, but also it's just, I think it's kind of beautiful. One of the things I really love about this culture is that people are in the art, especially, just not afraid to go there.
Yes, I think so. I very much agree. And I think, we're already taking chances, I guess, by creating art in this niche and in this language. So I always feel like, why not just continue to take chances and go further. And, it's sort of that power of not having so many eyes on us, maybe, and not
right.
having to bend to certain sponsors or large companies or this or that we really can experiment and go there, as you say. Yeah, it's sort of the power of kind of being in the shadows somewhat.
Yeah. So what are some of the ways, what are some of the pieces that you're proud of that you've done, or like, tell us about, you mentioned this piece with the New Testament, and I know that's pretty recent. So if you want to jump to that, you're welcome to, but I know you've done more stuff than that. And I know you've been kind of producing regular plays since the gears started turning after the pandemic. But you could talk about it in terms of just what these plays are and where they happened, and that's fine because people should know about your work. And also, I'm sort of excited about some about these seeds that you found, or what were some maybe breakthroughs where you're like, oh, a risk, I'm going for it,
Yes. I think that's always kind of what I want to do is, it's not what I want to do, but it's what excites me, is finding something that's sort of dangerous and upsetting and trying to work that out in dramatic form. So that was also the seed of the New Testament play, which was also I found when I was a fellow at the Yiddish Book Center. I was there for 3 years, and it was very important 3 years for me in sort of becoming a Yiddish artist and professional. But there I found they had a translation of the New Testament into Yiddish. In their shelves, they had a lot of it. And they actually said that in this print shop they have at the Yiddish Book Center, they have a sort of faux print shop with old printing machines and Yiddish type and all of that. And they said that one collection of the Yiddish movable type, just the letters in lead, it belonged to this guy, Chaim Einspruch, who was the translator of the New Testament into Yiddish. And after he died, his almana, his widow, donated the set of type to the Yiddish Book Center because she said nothing would have made my late husband, Chaim, happier than generations of Jewish children coming to the Yiddish Book Center and laying out and printing their Hebrew names with his type. And I thought, what just a strange sort of set of ironies, that this was a Yiddish-speaking Jew from Galicia who had immigrated and settled in Baltimore, and he found Christianity, and he devoted his life to...
Oh, he did? So this wasn't just like, oh, this is an interesting book.
Exactly. He was actually a missionary, and his goal in translating was to propagate his newfound faith among his Jewish brethren and sistren.
Okay.
And but the fact that the wife, who was not Jewish, would think that he would be so happy that Jewish kids were printing their names with his type and all of that. So he was still, in one sense, a very committed Jew and a committed Yiddishist, and actually a fantastic Yiddish writer, translator, and then a very devout and ardent and sort of annoying Christian.
That's incredible.
I say annoying just because he was known for standing outside of a big shul in Baltimore's Jewish district, and on Shabbos standing on a soapbox and preaching to the Jews as they went to services about Jesus and all of that. But I just thought,
that's amazing.
Yeah, what an interesting figure and story, and this work that he created. And I was told that the sort of one fact that gets bandied about at the Yiddish Book Center when they're giving this tour and showing the letters is that he had to buy his own set of type because no Jewish printer would help him with his project. So he had to learn printing and buy machinery himself and do it on his own. And
what a story.
So I sort of imagined that story. I didn't know any details about these Jewish printers he went to or what their conversation might have been like. But I sort of imagined that, and imagined this character of a printer, and imagined a sort of foil, a third character that would be a kind of foil for them both, a sort of anti-fascist activist, because this was all happening in the years of the war in the early 1940s.
Okay.
And yeah, set it in Baltimore and have these Jews meet in a printing shop and work out the problems of the world and figure out this drama. So that was a really interesting thing to get to do that at the New Yiddish Rep in the East Village, just steps away from actually the Yiddish Theater Hall of Fame, which is on the sidewalk.
Right.
So it was right there near where all these Yiddish theaters had been, and to feel that I was now in this new millennium making a new contribution to that legacy, and one that, yeah, I mean, I'm proud of the fact that, yeah, it's in this Yiddish language, and we're talking about some old stories, but we're also pushing things forward. And the Forward commented on that, the Forward, in their review, where they said, yeah, he's made a new contribution to the Yiddish theater repertoire, but it's not cliche. It's sort of shocking and interesting and controversial. And people who came to see the play appreciated it for what it was. People who didn't come, I remember getting some comments, looking at comments on articles that were posted about it, and people would write saying, how dare they tell a story about this Jewish apostate and blah, 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 blah. But of course, the point of the play wasn't to propagate his views. It was to tell a story and to examine it in a theatrical way. So, yeah.
Jetzt darf mir ablois. Ablois Filler. Du seht das ja kleine Gerade, gut nicht abgestemmt. Niedrige wie der andere Schriftzeichen. Wenn du nicht verschmiert werden mit Tint, wenn man bei Farbe ausgesetzte Oisiers, und es wird sich verwasen, dort auf dem umgelegten Blatt ablois.
Gut, wir von dem Lois.
Jetzt legen wir weglegen den Passachale. Nein, nicht auf links von dem. Du setzt mir Spiegelbild. Jeder Osten ist gut, auf rechts von dem friedlichen Osten. So der umgedrückte Blatt sich leinen, von rechts auf links. Verstehst?
Verstanden, Rebbe.
Das bin ich nicht.
Aber du lernst mich. Ich komme von der Sprache Sanzer Chassidim. Und du hast mich schon mehr gelernt, wie der Sanzer Rebbe hat getan allein gelernt. Jeder, was hat etwas zu lernen, ist ein Rebbe, nein?
Kein Mensch gehört das Wort.
Die Schlichen von Jeschua, seine 12, bei anderen nicht gute Übersetzer von dem Bris Chadashah, von unserem Loschen, rufen an Jeschua lernen. Aber ist doch gewinn naiv, nein? Bei mir rufen sie jemanden beim richtigen Namen. Rebbe, heimisch, ja? Rebbe Jeschua.
I think one of the greatest things we can do in our, current world of where Yiddish is, where it exists as a spoken language for a lot of people and exists as that word post-vernacular language for a lot of other people. And like you said, you're from grandma, and in that cult, they don't experience this, the secular culture of it, but then you do have the secular culture, which it's like, in order to be a full participant in the secular culture, you kind of have to have some idea of what the Saturday morning service goes like, so you can understand the jokes and the references and all this stuff and all that and all these things. It's like, I think one of the greatest things we can do is just show the messiness of real life and maybe that means you gravitate towards the more whoa stories, or maybe it's I was thinking about this. I was playing with Michael Winograd in February at Barbez, and we got Joanne Bortz to sing. He got Joanne Bortz to sing this Harriet Kane song, "My Bar Mitzvah Boy," and Harriet Kane was a Yiddish singer who was married to a clarinetist, Marty Levitt, whose son Dave Levitt is still around, is very active in New York, and taught at Claes Canada last year, and posts a lot of really good stuff on Facebook, and knows a lot about the tradition from being in it, basically as a family member. And this song was it was very kind of post-Fiddler kitsch. I actually could be wrong about the dates, but the vibe I got from it was what if we write another song that could be If I Were a Rich Man? And it's as sugary as you can get. And I just thought we were playing this song and really committing to it because, why not? And I just had this feeling of if you want us at our best, you have to take the rest, kind of thing. And it's I think, those people with their stupid comments online, those people with their very narrow comments online have or the people in the world right now who have just a ridiculously narrow and boring version, a vision of what being Jewish is, which unfortunately goes all the way up to the highest seats of power at the moment. And it's it's so much more fun to be in the mess. It's so much more fun. Because, like, who are we? I'm a mess. I mean, it's like we're artists. And when you get down to it, it's like we're also just human beings. And boy, is life not linear, And it's like you get some weird guy, and especially that generation, you get some guy who he's like, the key to salvation for the Jewish people is translating the Bible, the New Testament, into Yiddish, and the other guy was like, the key for the salvation of the world was creating Esperanto, or I forget, there was something else that was similar to Esperanto that someone talked about, and I was like, was it created by a Jew? And they were like, oh yeah. And I'm like, yes. Just like these universalism, like push towards this wild universalism in that moment.
I mean, they say about Esperanto that, maybe you've heard this anecdote, but yeah, of course, the creator was a Jew. And in the conferences, the early Esperanto conferences, all of the lectures would, of course, be given in Esperanto. But then the language that everyone would be speaking when they would go out into the hallway just to chat over coffee was Yiddish.
Yeah, I mean, it's hilarious, and it's beautiful. It's just like, what a dream, what a good dream. You're trying to unite everybody, at least in that one, it's a little less funky than the one that the one you wrote your play about, but maybe for other people not, So, yeah, so actually this is a good segue to talk about a new play that you mentioned when we were setting up this episode. I'll try to pronounce it just so I can. Suda von die Sieben Zindikers. All right. And that's the Feast of the Seven Sinners. And I'll just tell people it's coming. Is it through New Yiddish Rep or not?
This is through theater at the 14th Street Y. I was a fellow at their LABA program, LABA, Laboratory for Jewish Culture.
Oh, that's cool.
And this was my project, and we did 3 songs of it, and then they asked us back to do sort of LABA second stage, as they call it, to present the whole work.
That's great. So then that's coming at the end of June on the 28th and 29th, which we're going to make sure that this episode airs in time for that to get people excited and knowledgeable about it. But yeah, tell us about this play. What was the seed for this one?
This one, I'd say, unlike the others I've written, it wasn't coming across a text or a story. It was coming across people that I adore and respect and admire their art, and thought I want to do something with them. So that was, the members of what was formerly known as Mama Liga, basically. Started working on this with Rachel Leader and Rebecca Mack and Matthias Kaufman and Rafi Bowden. And I had gone to a concert of theirs that they were giving not far from me here in Brooklyn at someone's apartment. And it was sort of an anarchist house show. It was a kind of anarchist apartment with anarchist flags and posters and pins and materials all around. And they were just performing their new Yiddish inflected klezmer music. And I was just really in love with their sound, and particularly one tune that I heard, which was the Sirba, which was this just really fast, lively, energetic, exciting tune. And I thought, I would really like to get to know these people better and to maybe write words to some of these tunes and see if we could work on something together. So the next summer found us at Klez Canada all together. And I thought I should do something for the cabaret. And I have all Shabbos to work on it, because Shabbos, there's not much going on. And just set out to write lyrics to this Sirba that I had heard. And we performed it that night at the cabaret. And it was a sort of sloppy start to what has now become this full-grown musical. But it's going to be a Yiddish language musical. And by the way, anytime we do Yiddish theater in New York, there's always super titles above the stage so everyone can understand.
Yeah, you got no excuse to not
Exactly,
come.
Which is always the first reaction, often the first reaction of people when I say I'm writing a new Yiddish play. They'll say, oh, I'd love to come, but I don't understand Yiddish. But in fact, they'll understand everything. Yeah, and it's another sort of sexy, salacious tale. 7 sinners gather together. They're sort of a criminal enterprise in Vilna in 1897, and they gather together to celebrate their villainy in their annual feast. And as things are likely to do when a group of sinners gathers and has a feast, things go wrong, and all of their tensions start revealing themselves, and things start breaking apart in sort of smashing, exciting ways. And all told through brand new Yiddish songs to brand new tunes, brand new words. And I think it'll be quite a spectacle.
That's good. We need Yiddish spectacles.
Yeah.
It's so great to hear about all this new stuff, and the fact that it's like, that's one of the best ways to make work, is just get inspired by people who are inspiring. And one of the great things about this Yiddish world is none of us are so busy or famous that we are unavailable. We're basically all available, and maybe more available than you think.
Available and curious and excited to take on new things. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And it's cool because it's like we want to take on new things, but we want to do it with as like being full, having like a full plate or like a full kitchen, It's like klezmer music is so funny because so much of it was made at a period when there was, sort of intermittent access to sort of, let's say, like the full flavor dishes. And so a lot of people fell in love with things that were like missing some ingredients, whether it was the spices or maybe it's missing like the grain, like the kasha, and so then they made this music that some of which is really great by accident, a lot of which, to me, I'll just be honest, I have a YouTube playlist called Questionable Modern Klezmer that I put things on every once in a while. It's definitely not enjoyable for me to listen to, but it's there. And it's just sort of this thing. I sort of have this question because I got into the Yiddish scene so quickly in my love of Yiddish and was sucked into learning from all the people who were really committed to, like, let's say, keep the metaphor, having their kitchens full of the right ingredients, and cooking with all the ingredients necessary, all the schmaltz, but like not schmaltz in the way that we mean it, like usually, but like, not using oil, using chicken fat. Like, it makes a difference in the way things taste. And right. And so the music and the language and the poetry and all that stuff. And so it's like, it's so great that there's so many people who are just going for it again, but with this goal of like coming at it full and not coming at it with like, oh, I learned one thing and now I can just do everything I want. It's like, yeah, you can and you probably should, but also just keep trying to make sure you're stocking up.
Exactly. And keep learning. Yeah. Like I keep trying to test myself and expose myself to new things and to learn because it never ends. I mean,
nope.
Yeah, and my grandma was the same way. She would be sitting at her table at age 90 with tomes that she was still reading closely and annotating in the margins. And that's another thing I admire about her and people like her, these sort of amateur intellectuals in a way, where they're just committed to a life of learning. And it's funny that you were talking about this all with the metaphor of a recipe and cooking and all of that, just because the first song of our piece as it is now is a cooking song where it's a recipe. Every number in this show takes on the form of a different sort of traditional klezmer Eastern European musical form. So this first one is a cumulative song. Like Echad Mi Odea and Ven Mashiach Vet Kumen, etc. But where each verse you're adding a new line, and then in the next verse you're saying that line plus the new line, etc. And I thought, well, it would be fun to do that, but in the form of a recipe, where every step you're adding is an instruction in the recipe. So that's the first song in the show where Taibel is cooking the feast, and she's laying out the recipe as she's cooking this roast meat.
That's so cool. Yeah, the service people, we were there in our culture at one point, and that relationship changed, and we were also in everywhere else, and that's a good place to start, especially for a story like that.
Yeah.
You need that perspective of the people who are just sort of like, all right, the villains are coming, let's cook the feast.
Exactly. It turns out she's one of them herself.
Oh, good.
But she's also, a balabusta.
Yeah, well, and that's the coolest role Awesome. Well, I think that's just like a super sweet spot, and happy to sort of wrap there. But is there anything else that you want to make sure people know as we're, at this moment? And also you can say, where can people find you?
Right. No, not too much else. I think we had a wonderful shmuas, and I was really happy to get to do it. And people can find me. The best place that I update regularly is really just my Instagram, which is Mikhl Darling, Mikhl Darling. And I'm not saying there that I'm everyone's darling, but that's merely a take on Michael Darling, who's the youngest boy in Peter Pan, which growing up, I always loved the Peter Pan story. And I also felt a kinship with Michael Darling because I was Michael and also the youngest son of my family, youngest child. But anyway, people can keep tabs with me there. My website, which I don't update often enough, is yashinsky.com. And
I know that feeling.
Look out for tickets to this show, which will be June 28th and 29th at the theater at the 14th Street Y.
That's great. Get on down to New York and check out the show. Awesome, Mikhl. Well, what a pleasure. I'm so glad we got to hang.
Thank you so much, Dan. Thanks to Battle Bela.
Yes.
And it was a pleasure. I'm a chaya.
Soll bezweit wir suchen Stillkeit und gefinnen Chome, Punkt wie alte Freund. Und mir von Kämpfen und von Wildkeit Shalom folgt noch ne Chome, wie bei alte Freund. Nächten treuer Schreck und Sorgen, s'ist nur da a bissl heint. Oi weiss ich was wird kommen morgen, a wie men ist zusammen, Punkt wie alte Freund.
Well, that was my conversation with Mikhl Yashinsky. Mikhl is a serious cat who is making a lot of really great work from an incredibly well thought out and really informed point of view, from a really knowledgeable place, and from such a visceral, deep love of all things Yiddish. It was so fun to talk with him and to just connect in all the ways, even though the work that we do individually doesn't often connect directly. We usually kind of pass by each other a little bit, ships in the night. And it was just so much fun. It really reminds me of why I love doing these podcasts and having these conversations. It's so enriching, and I hope it is for you too. So that's it. I've already told you to give us all your money, and sending out a lot of love to everybody out there. It's a lot, and so I hope that you can take some time and listen to this and find your way to somewhere beautiful. So, wishing you all well, and we'll be back with another episode next month. So in the meantime, be well, sei gesund, and good Shabbos.
S'ist nur da a bissl heint. Oi weiss ich was wird kommen morgen, a wie men ist zusammen, Punkt wie alte Freund. Nächten treuer Schreck und Sorgen, s'ist nur da a bissl heint. Oi weiss ich was wird kommen morgen, a wie men ist zusammen, Punkt wie alte Freund.